Well, hello everyone. We are finally here. We are finally at the beginning of our Cosmos series. I just have to tell you, I have been trying to put together a series of sermons, about the universe outside of our planet for almost 2 years now. And every time I was ready to go for it, something terrible would happen in our world, and I would have to preach about that instead. And this year I finally just said, okay, we're doing the series in March. I don't care what happens. And then this past week I ended up being out of the pulpit entirely because of a death in my family. So we are finally starting this series this week. And I also do want to say that the compassion and kindness that you all have shown to me and my family in the past week has been wonderful, and I am so very grateful for you all. But before we get into the cosmos, the first thing that I want to talk about is this story from the New Testament, and it's kind of this interesting, trippy story. It's usually called the Transfiguration. And in this story, Jesus leads 3 of his bros, Peter, John, and James, up to the top of a mountain. And when they get to the top of the mountain, they see a blinding flash of light, and Jesus transforms into this celestial being, and he's in this angelic clothing. And then 2 of the most important Hebrew Bible prophets, Moses and Elijah, appear, and they start talking with Jesus, and Peter sees this happening, and he tries to participate in the conversation, right? He says, hey Jesus, this mountain seems pretty cool. Why don't we maybe build houses up here for you and Elijah and Moses? And I just picture Moses and Elijah like looking over at Peter and then looking at Jesus like, dude, who's that guy? And Jesus kind of saying, yep, I know, it's okay. He's with me. But then Peter is immediately rebuked by a voice that comes out of a cloud, and the voice says, Jesus is my son, in whom I am well pleased. Do as he says. And that part is really interesting to me, because that voice in the cloud is generally understood to be Yahweh, right? The God from the Hebrew Bible. And Hebrew Bible God doesn't show up a whole lot in the New Testament. Peter, John, and James are 3 of the only humans in the New Testament who get to interact directly with Hebrew Bible God. It's this very rare and very special moment. And so Peter, John, and James are so afraid that they collapse onto the ground in fear. And when they look up, the celestial beings are gone, and it's just Jesus again, and he tells them, it's okay, it's over, come with me. And they all leave the mountain. Our Christian kindred have spent many hundreds of years and many hundreds and thousands of pages trying to examine what this story means from a Christian theological standpoint. But as a Unitarian Universalist, the perspective on the story that I am more interested in is much more basic than that, which is just being Jesus's friend must have been really weird. Like, you spend your time hanging out with this guy and traveling with him and eating with him and all the rest, and yet he clearly exists on a level that you will simply never reach. And even when he invites you to his level, even when he takes you up to the mountain with him, it becomes very clear that you simply aren't like him. And if you try to, make a contribution like Peter was with his suggestion about building houses on the mountain, you are immediately reminded of how out of your depth you are. And I feel like we all have people like this in our lives, right? People who simply move through the world in a way that is fundamentally different from most other people. These people, are often artists and scientists and philosophers, or, brilliant, creative people who just have their own way of being. And sometimes, you're with them and you get to see them have an idea or an inspiration. Maybe they get real quiet and their eyes kind of glaze over, or maybe they start talking to you, really animatedly. This is a true story. I was once sitting in a car with Tom Waits when he got an idea, and we had to be quiet for a minute, and then he sang some lyrics into a little tape recorder that he had in the glove compartment. And when you see somebody like this go to this place, you know that they are thinking or imagining or dreaming, and in doing so, they are going somewhere where you simply cannot follow them. And even if you could follow them up that particular mountain, you wouldn't be present in that place in the same place that they were. And so we learn through our relationships with these people that we can love them and they can love us, but we need to love them at least partially on their own terms, and accept that part of them will always be beyond our grasp. And I think this is why we often associate artists and geniuses and generally very unusual people with the moon, right? I mean, part of it, I think, and sure, the moon is most visible at night, and we associate nighttime with darkness and mystery, but I think it's also because loving some people is a lot like loving the moon, right? They are so very present and yet so very far away. Since human beings have existed, we have looked up at the moon and admired it and wondered about it and mythologized it, and still we have known very little concrete information about it. And I tell you all of this because this is also how I have come to relate to God. I believe that God is all around us and is within us, and I believe that God knows us and loves us, and I also believe that there are levels on which the distance between me and God will always be impossibly far. Right? God and I can love each other all day, and I can follow God up the mountain, but once we are up that mountain, we will have radically different experiences. And even if you're someone who doesn't believe in God, this same thing can be said about knowledge, right? About our understanding of our world. There will always be more to discover and to know, to the point where our universe, our reality, will never be fully known or clear to us. And I think this is why creative and unusual people themselves are often drawn to the moon. I think they see something of themselves in it. One of these brilliant and hard-to-know people who felt drawn to learn more about the moon was Galileo Galilei, right? The guy who we usually just call Galileo. He is the only scientist who I am aware of who is a big enough deal that he gets to be just his first name, right? Like it's Madonna, Beyonce, Galileo. Like he's there as in terms of scientists. Galileo, we all know, is one of the most brilliant and famous scientists of all time. And one of his many accomplishments is that in 1609, he took a telescope that he pretty much invented, right? Technically, somebody else invented the telescope, but Galileo, read about it and built his own, which was much better without ever having seen the first one in person. And Galileo took this telescope that he built, and he became the first person who we know of to point a telescope at the night sky and to try and learn about what exists beyond our planet. And Galileo managed to get himself in a whole lot of trouble with a whole lot of people, right? People who were deeply freaked out by the things that he discovered that challenged their beliefs about our reality. And a lot of the controversial discoveries that Galileo made concerned the moon. Galileo discovered, for example, that the moon is not a perfect sphere, as it was believed to be by a lot of people, but rather that the moon is covered in craters and mountains. The mountains on the moon are higher in proportion to its size than the mountains on Earth. And from this observation, he was able to determine that the moon is made out of physical matter, right? And thus, like all things made out of physical matter, the moon is impermanent and is not meaningfully different on a spiritual level from all of the matter that exists here on Earth. And yet, even with these discoveries, and with all of the discoveries since then, even with the discoveries made by the handful of human beings who have actually walked on the moon, those moonwalkers and Galileo would be the first ones to tell you that the amount that we know about the moon, or about anything at all for that matter, is insignificant compared to the amount that we don't know. And that will almost certainly always be true. And so I would add that the same thing is true about God. That even if we have deep religious experiences like Peter, John, and James did when they got that oh so rare FaceTime with Old Testament God, we still will never be able to grasp all that there is to know and feel and experience about what is in our world and what is beyond our world. And when we do learn new things, when we are able to uncover more information about our world, or about the unusual people who we know, or about the gods that we believe in, we may find that just like Galileo, we end up making discoveries that are not as beautiful or as transcendent as what we might have been hoping for. Galileo's biggest contribution to lunar science was discovering the ways in which the moon is imperfect and ugly. The moon is absolutely crucial for the survival of our species, right? The moon not only creates the tides that moves our oceans, the moon's orbit around our planet also stabilizes our planet's orbit, which keeps our planet's climate, regulated enough to support life as we know it. That is what the moon does for us, and Galileo is the guy who discovered the ways in which it is flawed. So of course his work was controversial. How could it not be? I have found that some of the most difficult moments in my life have been when I have discovered the imperfect and ugly parts of the people whom I love the most, and these may be the most difficult moments of all, the moments when I have discovered the imperfect and ugly parts of what I understand to be God. Even Jesus' friends end up in a place kind of like this, right? Peter makes what seems like a relatively innocent comment during one of Jesus' otherworldly moments, and he ends up getting yelled at by a cloud in a way that scares him half to death. I feel like many of us have spent this past year thinking about the ways in which our world and the inner workings of our world, whether or not you want to call that God. Many of us have spent the past year feeling really up close to the ways in which our world can be difficult and painful. And I've just spent the past week and a half processing the death of my niece. So I can tell you that that's where I've been. Today marks 1 year of socially distant worship services at the Church of the River. It's funny, a year ago when we were planning this, Chris, who's the only person who gets to be in the room while I'm recording this, Chris, do you remember how long I told you we were going to do this for?
I think a few
Yeah, I said, look, let's plan for 3 weeks. I know that's way longer than this thing is going to be, but let's allow ourselves to be pleasantly surprised. And what followed was a year of feeling like the entire world was cowering on the ground in fear in front of something beyond our understanding, just like Peter, John, and James. And the end of the pandemic is a mystery, right? I've spent a year hearing people make all these very specific claims about when the pandemic was going to be over. Thus far, they have been 100% incorrect. So what do we do with all of this? Right? With so much in our world that is unknowable, and with at least part of what we know being so difficult, how do we move forward? The answer, I think, is actually rather simple. Not easy, but simple. The answer is that we love anyway. The answer is that we love our world, and if God is your thing, love our God in the same way that we can love our wacky friends, in the same way that Peter, John, and James still loved their friend Jesus after this very bizarre experience, in the same way that we can still love the moon. The answer is that we find within ourselves a love that is not contingent on us being in control. A love that is not contingent on us having all of the information we want, or for that matter, liking all the information that we have. The answer is that we learn to love the unknowable parts of our lives on their terms, not ours. And that we allow ourselves to be loved in return. Amen.